start the May 28th North Regional Plan Implementation Committee meeting, and if you would please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I believe that FOIA has been completed. Notices have been sent out for this meeting. Ask for a motion or comment on the minutes for the meeting.
Move to accept as written.
Motion to accept.
Second.
And a second. All in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your right hand.
And those on the
Those
iPhone,
opposed?
just say aye.
Motion passes. I guess first thing I'll ask for is whether or not there's any modifications to the agenda that anybody would like to make.
Mr. Chairman, would you like to move the ladies on implementation status and potential dissolution up in the agenda while we have a quorum?
Yes. Yes, we could do that.
Okay. And I would move to amend the agenda to bring item number 11, ladies on plan implementation status, to item
5A.
5A, right after citizen comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Would like to go around and let people introduce themselves.
Let me start.
Sure. Thank you, Alice.
Alice Howard, District 4, Beaufort County Council.
Van Willis, Town Manager, Port Royal.
I'm Stephen Murray, Mayor of the City of Beaufort.
Mike McPhee, I'm the Mayor Pro Tem for the City of Beaufort.
Robert Merchant, Acting Director, Beaufort County Planning and Zoning Department. And I'd like to introduce Krista Julio Cook. She took over for Diane McMaster, who retired earlier this month. So
Thank you. Hi.
we are very thankful to have her on board.
Great.
I'm Katie Herrera. I'm the Stormwater Manager for Beaufort County. Jenny Kozak, retired Planning Director for LOWCOUNTRY Council of Governments and currently working on contract with them on the Resiliency Project.
And on Zoom is Mitch Mitchell, Beaufort City Councilman.
And on Zoom is Jerry Ashbourne with the town of Port Royal.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. With the modification to the agenda, I'd like to go to the action item list, or to the dissolution docket.
Citizen comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Citizen comments. Do we have any citizen comments?
It doesn't seem like we have any. I will jump in, and I want to welcome Colonel Arbogast. He is the commanding officer of Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort. And just want to welcome him. Appreciate you being here today, sir.
Thank you. Anything else? I'd like to welcome all the new members to the board. Appreciate your attendance today, and it's great to have the first face-to-face meeting in an awful long time. I think we get a heck of a lot more done when we have the face-to-faces and we can actually see each other in their comments. So back again, I'd like to go to the Ladies Island Plan Implementation Committee agenda item, and the discussion that I have there is that there has been a document that I've prepared here for dissolution of the Plan Implementation Committee. And I would like to get this with a motion and a vote. If you would like, I would be happy to read the dissolution document. So May 28, 2021, in 2019, Beaufort County, the City of Beaufort, and the Town of Port Royal adopted the Ladies Island Plan and committed to incorporating the responsible growth measures set forth within the plan. The Ladies Island Implementation Committee was formed as directed by the North Regional Plan Implementation Committee and charged with executing the initial implementation action items of the plan. Specifically, the LIPIC worked to move forward 3 growth management measures recommended in the plan. Number 1, an ordinance requiring that new large housing projects be located where public sewer and water is available. 2, a fill ordinance limiting the amount of fill dirt that can be used for fill at the lowest lying areas. 3, a coastal resilience overlay requiring disclosure about future flooding risks in our lowest lying areas as a result of climate change. And 4, solidify the activity engaged with the LICPC. Beaufort County adopted the sewer ordinance in 2020. The fill ordinance and CRO was recommended for approval by Nrpic, the MPC, and the Beaufort Planning Commission. The City of Beaufort adopted the fill requirements in its flood damage preservation prevention ordinance in April of 2021. The fill ordinance and CRO are currently being considered through the public committee and council processes at Beaufort County and the Town of Port Royal. A chair and active committee for the LICPC are now a functional and local resident with local resident participation. Having taken action to move these growth management measures forward, the existence of LIPIC is no longer necessary, and long-term implementation of the plan is more appropriately within the purview of the Nrpic going forward. Once the above growth management measures are fully adopted, the next implementation action item involves a discussion of growth boundaries currently underway with the county, city, and town comprehensive plans. A task force was created under the LIPIC for the purpose of pre-planning the Ladies Island Village Center with representatives and staff from the city, county, and town that will become a steering committee when a consultant is retained for the master planning effort. With dissolution of the LIPIC, we ask the Nrpic to accept the overview of the following. Number 1, continuing management of the fill ordinance and CRO. 2, continuing management of the growth boundaries. 3, continuing overview of the LICPC. 4, continuing overview of the Ladies Island Village Task Force. That ends the dissolution document. Do I have any questions or comments?
I guess the comment I'd make is I'm appreciative of the implementation committee, especially Rob Merchant, who provided staff support on the county side, and is really responsible for bringing the team together to get the fill ordinance, the sewer density ordinance, and the overlay ordinance out of the implementation committee and up for discussion at the political jurisdiction. So high five to Rob. Also, Alan Patterson, who served as the chair of that committee. I think we felt like we've sort of accomplished the task that we were set out to do a few years ago. Now it's really in the hands of the political jurisdictions to execute and to weave those ordinances into the regulatory framework that we have. Additionally, Jason Hencher is serving as the new chair of the Ladies Island Community Preservation Committee. They're reestablishing that, so I think we're pretty optimistic about that committee being more formalized, setting a more formal foundation, and becoming a more active participant in advocating for Ladies Island on behalf of citizens. So supportive of the village task force staying together, and think that it's probably appropriate for it to come under the Northern Regional Implementation Committee, because that's where most of the political leadership at this point needs to be advocating. So I'm supportive of the dissolution.
Thank you.
I recall way back when we had the first meeting at the Ladies Island Elementary School, and it was overflowing parking lot and meeting room, and this group has come a great length, and thank you to staff with both the municipalities and the county, and it's accomplished quite a bit. But I agree that it's time for dissolution, and not many groups can accomplish what that group did, so in really a short period of time. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments? Looking for a motion?
This was great.
Well, I would, I'd make a motion to dissolve based on the language that Mike read from the dissolution document, and ask that that be included in the minutes of the meeting.
Thank you.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your right hand. Those opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. I will include, and I'll be happy to send you a PDF of this document today, later on. Also, with that, because in our Northern Regional Commission has taken under its scope of work the Village Task Force, I have the mandate that has been adopted for the Village Task Force. I will also include that as part of the package that I'll email to you. So with that, we'll go back to our regular agenda. And the first item on our agenda is BRIANA FREY presentation, Regional Housing Trust Fund update.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing this morning?
Thanks.
So will I be able to share my screen, and can you see it from the angle that you're sitting?
I believe so.
Okay, great. Well, before I share my screen, let me just introduce myself. My name is BRIANA FREY. I'm with a consulting firm, ASAKURA Robinson. I'm based out of Austin, Texas. We've been hired by the participating jurisdictions that are interested in starting up a regional housing trust fund in the Beaufort and Jasper County region, which includes the counties themselves, but also 6 other participating jurisdictions, including Port Royal and Beaufort, and 5 others. So I have my coworker, Alex Miller, here on the call with me. She is our principal in charge. She's based out of New Orleans. And we have been on this project now for about 4 months. And we are at a really pivotal point in our project. We hopefully will be wrapping up within the next 2 months, but we've identified our funding recommendations. And so we wanted just to take about 10 to 15 minutes of your time this morning to show you what we've got so far. And the idea is that you may not have any questions or comments yet because it may be a fire hose of information, but we want to encourage you guys to take this presentation. I'll make sure that it gets shared with everyone. And reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns. The idea is that we will be able to come back in about a month's time, and I will be presenting our final recommendations to the Southern Lowcountry Board on June 29th. And we hope that you all will also be able to attend or call in virtually. I'll be in person. And the idea is that then we would be able to start executing some agreements amongst the jurisdictions to contribute funds. So I will start from the beginning of our presentation, and then I'll slowly walk us through what we've got for today.
Before we start, could I make a point that I think we need to be invited as this group to that meeting? Because it's not just Soloco's project.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it'd be a joint meeting. Can we do it that way? And that may or may not be the intent, but I just.
Yeah, and I would just say that the name SoLoco unfortunately was attached to this, but it really is not.
Exactly. Yes,
You know,
that's
it's
a
not
good
the-
point. Yeah. And we need to be, and this group needs to be invited to that meeting.
And
Thank you, Allison. That's oftentimes not the perception.
the intent is that we will have the full hour to present of that meeting. So I think you're exactly right. It should be a joint meeting. And we've already changed the name. We no longer are referencing SoLoco because of the confusion. So now the name is officially going to be called the Beaufort Jasper County Regional Housing Trust Fund.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Yeah.
But I will make sure that that gets communicated to the invitation for the June 29th meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have about a 10-minute presentation. I'm going to be walking you through some of our draft recommendations that we would love feedback on over the next month, and that does include our funding recommendations. And I just briefly have a philanthropy partner update. So starting high level, the mission of the Beaufort Jasper County Regional Housing Trust Fund is to create and preserve affordable housing in the two-county area of South Carolina. So we have drafted this to make sure that it does capture the geographic region that you guys also serve on the committee today. Our vision is that regardless of their socioeconomic status, individuals and families in Beaufort and Jasper counties are able to remain in their homes or find high quality, safe, well-maintained housing in the same region as their place of employment. So I'm going to walk through our objectives, but really what we understand in terms of the community that we desire this housing trust fund to serve are those in your employment sector that definitely have a financial strain on finding affordable and quality housing. And I will just briefly mention, we've done extensive community research, understanding the socio-demographic trends in the region and the housing market as well. So if any of you guys want to see that research that we've done, we've compiled them into 2 different memos. So our objectives are to create new housing units or rehab and preserve existing units for households at or below 120% of the AMI, with a strong focus on households at or below 60% of AMI. So we do want to capture mixed affordability levels, and we think that this is a good way to model the housing trust fund so that it is not precluding other development such as mixed income developments that could really help the region in terms of getting affordable units online. But we do want the housing trust fund to have a focus at 60% or below. So like I mentioned, our research and our housing market research, we prescribed what we think means 60% since we acknowledge that Beaufort County's AMI is higher than Jasper County's. So we've done some analysis and we have some recommendations tied to that number. We want the Housing Trust Fund to be in accordance with the state enabling legislation that maintains a focus on households below 50% AMI. So this is important because we want to make sure that the Housing Trust Fund, again, does cater and allow for that mixed income, but also to have focuses that does align with the state enabling legislation. We want the Housing Trust Fund to provide workforce housing for the growing regional economy, and to help households maintain financial stability and build wealth by reducing the amount of money they spend on housing and transportation. So we do think that this regional model of a housing trust fund will be extremely successful for your region, noting that there are main economic employment centers and knowing that people commute across jurisdiction lines to get to their places of employment from their households. Our last 3 objectives are to make sure that the Housing Trust Fund is set up in a way that it's not only providing funding, but it's also building that pipeline for affordable housing units. So we see that this model can strengthen relationships, build trust, and engage partners and stakeholders, ensuring that an organized and collaborative approach to regional housing challenges. So this Housing Trust Fund would be updating your committees, updating local jurisdictions, being involved in advocacy, and really propelling the region forward into building the pipeline. And sometimes that is building the pipeline with developers. So that is these last two bullet point items, increasing awareness of existing and new financial products that serve the counties, as well as leveraging outside funding from banks, corporations, philanthropies, and federal, state, and local governments. So we do think that in the long term, this housing trust fund would really have a role in making sure that they continue attracting funding. And so we do have some ideas on that today. And we will be able to spend some more time on these slides when we come back to you guys in a month. So for review, we have 3 program areas that we believe the Housing Trust Fund will serve. So one, we do think that the Housing Trust Fund can be a clearinghouse for public properties. So this was a priority from our steering committee, that we know that there is an affordability crisis in terms of really increasing prices of property and vacant land, and even the properties that are developable for affordable housing or housing in general. And so we think that the Housing Trust Fund could be a clearinghouse for the reuse of vacant or underutilized publicly owned properties. This is something different than a land bank. And I want to make that clear, because South Carolina doesn't have the legislation in place to really make a land bank find the leverage that it can in other states. And so, but we do think this is something you guys can work towards. So if we go ahead and set it up to be a clearinghouse for public properties, we think in the long term, once the state of South Carolina allows enabling legislation to do land bank work, the Housing Trust Fund could be set up in a way to manage that. The meat and potatoes, though, of the Housing Trust Fund will be loans. So we want to set up the Housing Trust Fund to provide flexible and low interest financing for rental and for sale projects. So we do think your biggest housing gap right now is the rental market for the 60% and less AMI households. And so we do think that'll be the priority. And what's great about the way that loans are set up with housing trust funds is that the money is then returned and cycled through. And that goes the same for sale projects. So we do want to allow the opportunity for the Housing Trust Fund to be set up for sale projects, but we do want the focus to be on rental. And so we will structure term sheets for that type, for both types of projects. And lastly, not as nearly important, but a possibility, are grants. And so if the Housing Trust Fund is set up to provide grants to, say, affordable housing developers, that means that it wouldn't be able to come back and cycle through the system and be reinvested. And so really this would be an opportunity is if a philanthropy does provide funding for the Housing Trust Fund to administer the grants rather than the philanthropy doing it themselves. And typically that they will have prescribed rules and services that they want to fund, rather than the Housing Trust Fund really having the leniency to decide who they want to fund, as the case is with loans. So I want to jump towards the big question we have for you guys today. We have what we are proposing, a 10-year financial matrix that includes the funding that we would ask each jurisdiction to contribute to the Housing Trust Fund. And so we are proposing a model that we have a goal of raising $500,000 a year for the next 10 years, which will be distributed across the jurisdictions based on population size. And so our steering committee has vetted this matrix. And so this is the first time we're getting to show you guys today. And I think our big ask is just, does this make sense? Do you guys think this is something that your individual jurisdictions will be able to contribute over the next 10 years? And where can we take it from here? So let me walk you through what we've got here in this table. So I've got the next 10 years portrayed on the y-axis, and along the x-axis we have the different jurisdictions. So we have Beaufort County, Jasper County, Hilton Head, Bluffton, Port Royal, Hardeeville, the city of Beaufort, and Yemassee. And really what we're doing here is we're starting year one with an assumption that we could get 3% of the stimulus funds through the American Rescue Plan from each jurisdiction. And if we were able to get 3% of those total funds contributed to the Housing Trust Fund, we would start year one with about $2 million in the Housing Trust Fund. And this is comparable to the peer housing trust funds that we've researched. Some other South Carolina housing trust funds were able to start year one with $3 million, and that's just coming from one city. So we think the fact that this could be distributed across multiple jurisdictions, we may be even able to get a bigger number, or this $2 million target we think is something that we could definitely reach. Then moving forward from year 2 to year 10, again, we have that $500,000 goal annually to be gathered from each jurisdiction based on their population size. So what we've done here is we've detailed what about to from a dollar perspective annually. And you guys can see that this gets us to about $7 million by year 10. And really, we think that $2 million is a good threshold to really get some lending going. We know that it'll take a couple years to see the return on those investments from the developers to be cycled back into the Housing Trust Fund. But we hope that by attracting $500,000 a year, that really moves the needle towards being able to reinvest $500,000 into housing every single year. And this is all assumptions at this point. We want you guys to be able to take this back, digest it, give us feedback. And like I said, we'll be coming back in at the end of June for our final recommendations. So this is where the majority of our conversation wants to be had today, but I will just quickly flip a slide and show you guys we are assuming that each jurisdiction will be contributing from different pockets of money. So what we've done here is we've detailed out the fiscal year 2020's budgets from each of your jurisdictions. There is still some missing information that we're gathering, but noting here that everyone does have different pockets of money that they may decide to pull from to contribute from the Housing Trust Fund. And I think that this is important because we understand that there are different processes in place to approve this funding to come to the Housing Trust Fund, and it would need to be set up in a way that there could be flexibility in providing some of this funds, and whether or not it comes in during year one, during year two, and having that flexibility of distributing funds to the Housing Trust Fund. So this yellow line item is the total amount of the American Rescue Plan funds that we understand are coming to each of your jurisdictions. And like I said, we're only asking that 3% be provided to the Housing Trust Fund if you guys approve that idea. So I'll pause for questions, and I also want to allow Alex Miller, my principal in charge, to chime in with anything that I breezed over too quickly.
BRIANA, I think that was great. So let's just take some questions.
BRIANA, thanks for the presentation and the funding matrix. If I understood the program objectives clearly, it was about loans to serve at least some households in the below $49,000 or 60% AMI range, to help coordinate public properties and the use of those properties, and then possibly to administer grants.
That's right.
When I think about the organization being able to do that, I think that we have some organizations in town that are already sort of in that space. And so I was curious if Beaufort Housing Authority or Habitat for Humanity have been engaged or on the steering committee with the study.
Yes, great question. We have talked to them, and we have identified the opportunities that they aren't able to provide and how this Housing Trust Fund can be set up in a way to fill that gap within the region. And Alex, I know that you had the chance to speak to both of them during the interview, so I don't know if there was anything.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And what we are recommending as an organizational structure for this entity is that there be a local 501c3, whether it's a new 501c3 or an existing 501c3. That hasn't been determined, but that would actually manage, yeah, there you go, thanks, BRIANA, that would manage the actual administration of the Housing Trust Fund with a partner that would be acquired through an RFQ that would be a community development financial institution like Community Works South Carolina that actually administers the Greenville Housing Trust Fund, or like there's another entity in Charleston that's similar. There's actually one local entity that has the CDFI ability. What that sort of partnership does is it means that you have a great local administrator for the fund that is governed by a local board, but you also have this expertise in making loans, which is what the CDFI brings, and particularly their mission as established by the federal government is to make loans to projects that are community serving in exactly this way. So they're very used to, being flexible in the way that you need to when you're trying to develop affordable housing, and in the way that like a traditional bank may not be able to, for, say pre-development dollars or acquisition of property or other things that may come up as part of these deals to really get them done. And so we think that that's probably the proposed organizational, that's definitely what we're going to recommend, and probably is going to end up being the organizational structure. So I think it's possible to talk to, we didn't ask those local entities specifically if they would be interested in kind of serving as a 501c3 for this. I know they each have their own missions as well, right? And so want to make sure that that's something they'd be open to. And we do think that's something that probably is a kind of follow-up conversation once these recommendations are made with various entities to sort of see where that should reside. But we absolutely have engaged both those entities to find out how this can be of the most assistance to them. And I think that, we've tried to make this as flexible as possible, which is, I think, really what we heard from everyone, to make sure that this will be useful to some of those entities that are already operating locally, because that's really important, is building that pipeline.
Alex, thanks for
go ahead.
ask for clarity. So I know in Memo 1 that you produced in March, there were 3 options, and I think those options might be partially captured on this slide. And just so I'm clear, which model are you going to recommend that we proceed with?
We'll recommend this sort of 501c3 CDFI partnership that's shown on this slide. That's the model.
We'd start our new 501c3 that would be staffed and.
I think there's some question just from feedback we've gotten as to whether there would be a new 501c3 or whether that would seek to be administered by an existing 501c3. We don't particularly have a position on that as long as the existing 501c3 is fully aware of kind of what it takes to do this and has the funding that would be needed to kind of get this off the ground. I do think one thing that we have heard from some of our philanthropic partners is that there's a lot of interest in potentially supporting some of those startup costs and staffing and administration in the first years, which is great. And so, yes, this is what we're going to be recommending is either starting a new 501c3 or having this become a program of an existing 501c3 if that's the way that the committees want to go.
Because my understanding is the startup of a new 501, there takes up to 3 years to really sort of demonstrate the balance sheet and work through before we really can start.
That's where the CDFI actually comes in. So what you don't want to do is start a new CDFI, for sure. Do not do that, because that is where that sort of 3-year period comes in for trying to kind of build up a balance sheet and do other things. But if you partner with an existing CDFI that already has the balance sheet, then I don't think you have to worry so much about whether the 501c3 is new or existing.
Okay. Plus the CDFI can help with the underwriting.
Exactly. That's really their role, right? Is you're kind of helping bring them the projects, the people, the partners. You're kind of doing the local convening and coordination through that 501c3 and making sure that the priorities of the fund are maintained. But the CDFI is bringing that technical expertise on loan underwriting. They're the ones who are actually issuing the loans, all of that. So they're really managing the sort of money side of it for you in that way to make sure that this is effective.
Let me ask you a question.
Ready? I had a question. In your costs for this, I think you have, but have you included thinking about the mandatory fees that housing has to pay, such as the sewer, water hookups, those kind of things? Is that included in these costs, or would that be in addition? For instance, Beaufort County set aside $100,000 last year. We're going to do it this year for the hookups, but for Beaufort Jasper water sewer. So we need to, if it's not included, we need to include it, because those are, the mandatory costs that we can't get around, that we have to pay, or the developer has to pay. Somebody has to pay them.
Yeah. Right. So I do think that the structure we're recommending, which is looking at basically low interest flexible loans as the primary financing mechanism we'd be offering, would be able to encompass some of those fees and other things within the loan structure. Now, there is a possibility that folks, like, there are things that are harder to loan money for, which are things like pre-development, expenses, like, oh, I need, engineering drawings. I need all these things I need to do before a project can even start. And so that's where we do see a potential role for grants as part of this fund as well. And the reason we've been hesitant to say, and I think that our memo is going to kind of say grants like are an it depends, is that it's really about how many dollars are going to be able to actually be invested in the fund. Because if we have a nice large fund that's going to grow every year, then I think it's eminently possible to say, hey, we'll put 90% of the funds every year toward loans, and we'll put 10% toward grants to really close those gaps, and that'll be great. But if we have a much smaller amount of funding that's going to go toward the fund, then you really need to kind of conserve and grow every dollar so this can eventually grow enough to be really effective. And so because we don't yet have, I think, a total answer on what level of funding, I think we're just going to kind of write our recommendations as like a contingent thing where it's like, okay, if you have above this amount, then you can maybe focus on grants. If you have below this amount, maybe just focus on loans until you can really build that fund up.
Have you seen, unless somebody else has one, have you seen the deed transfer fees be used for this? I saw it on your list. And could you tell us where?
Yeah, so we have definitely seen real estate transfer fees be used for this. BRIANA, I think maybe that was the Nevada fund was one of them that used it that way. There are a few different jurisdictions that have used different types of real estate transfer fees as sources for housing trust funds. And we can provide a more specific example, but I know there was at least one or two that we spoke with across the country that were already doing that.
There's no South Carolina laws against that or any restrictions on doing that?
So there was a restriction on, I believe, another type of real estate transfer fee that we did not end up recommending for use because it was already either not able to be dedicated to this, or in the jurisdictions that were able to use it, it was already dedicated to like conservation, preservation and conservation. So we did not recommend using that source. But the deed transfer fees, I believe, are just local revenue that you can dedicate how you want.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's my last question.
Any other questions from the board?
I would like to get the analysis you did of the economic.
I think we could all use that.
I think we could all like to have that before our meeting if we could.
Great. So just to clarify, the analysis, just like this presentation here, or was there the economic sort of piece about what we'd use to determine the use of the fund on 60% and below? Just making sure we understand what to get you.
I'd like to see the background information on how you determine the demographics. The demographics and the AMIs.
Yeah, the AMIs. Yeah, we can send you. That's our memos 1 and 2, so we can make sure you all get a chance to see that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like a copy of the presentation sent out also with that.
And just to be clear, should I send that to Chris at Beaufort County or Robert Merchant?
So that it can be distributed.
Chris.
Right.
Thank you.
And I guess the last thing that I will say about those demographics kind of in summary is basically if you look at the occupational categories that are in Beaufort and Jasper County, right, and you just kind of divide those out, the top 4 occupational categories all fall into basically a below 60% AMI sector. For their average wage is below 60% AMI. So that's generally, we're looking at retail jobs, service jobs. Like the economy is heavily embedded in some of those job types that just have, slightly lower wages on average. It can include teachers, childcare workers. There's just a whole bunch of folks who fall into that category. And so when we look at the housing that's actually available, right, the largest gap is in terms of housing that is available to serve folks working in those occupations. And because we knew that the emphasis of this really was workforce housing, right? How do we create a sustainable economy by supporting our workers? That was really where we wanted to focus. So that's what you'll see in the memo when we provide it.
Alex, do you recall the rent price points at the 60% below number for Beaufort County?
BRIANA, do we have
I can pull it up if you give me a second.
It's not that big of a deal. I was trying to remember from the Bowen. I know it's in the Bowen study.
Okay. It is. Oh no. Sorry. I don't have it.
Okay, we'll get those to you. I think the other reason we said 60%, right, where the statewide legislation actually specifies 50% as a sort of focus, and that is something we think we'll just need to kind of include in the governing documents, even though we think 60% is kind of a more doable goal. The reason we really wanted to focus on that additionally is because that's your kind of ability to leverage low-income housing tax credits kind of falls at that level too. And I think as many of you may know, right, those really do support like mixed income rental properties. So we're not talking about an opportunity where we're sort of saying, oh, just 100%, lower income rental properties. We were talking about high quality mixed income rental as the real goal of this. So just wanted to make sure folks kind of have that vision, right? When you're thinking about what this is going to support is thinking about both, those kind of great mixed income rental projects that are well located, as well as, if there's gaps in for sale development, we want to support that too. So we don't want to exclude, but we do think that sort of quality mixed income product is something that we still need to kind of build out in the market.
This is the closest thing we have to answering your question.
I think we've done this in the memos, but yeah, I think on a slide, the closest thing we have in terms of those wages and the occupations.
Yeah, so that's the wage sets up for.
Yeah.
So we're really looking at those top four. So this is those top four categories there: the food preparation and serving, sales and related, office administrative, and transportation material. Those are your kind of top four industries in terms of occupations. And as you can see, the mean wage is not, extremely high for those. And then you can see we've got healthcare and education in here as well. While on average those are higher, we definitely think that there's room for, like younger teachers, for childcare workers, for, all kinds of different healthcare practitioners who, are not necessarily earning doctor salaries to be a part of this as well. So don't want to think that we're excluding those folks, but just noting that your top four occupations by far all have these kind of lower mean wages, which is where we really want to see us kind of close that gap so we don't, so we can have the workers that our economy depends on housed here.
So in the vision that you put in one of the first slides, it talks about that the workforce can live in the same region as their place of employment. And, so region, and I think we define region a little differently in Beaufort County. Have you thought about in terms of governance, because I think we agree, we want our people who work in our community to also live in our community. And folks who have to get up every morning and drive an hour to and from work, it compounds all kinds of problems for us.
Right.
So have you thought about in the governance model how funds would be distributed or prioritized for projects that are within workforce and urban centers?
Yeah, so I'll take a start at this, but BRIANA, you can fill in too. So we looked at creating geographic priorities for investment, and our ultimate take, based on talking to the sort of peer housing trust funds and to the sort of local jurisdictions, was that it didn't make sense in the sort of governing documents to set up any kind of preference. What we would suggest in the governance model, which we're looking at being, basically a regional board of some kind, we would think, from all the contributing jurisdictions, that there would be a matrix that would enable you to prioritize projects. And we have some suggestions about what that could look like. But that would have projects that are within, if you said urban centers as a priority, knowing that those should still tend to cost a bit more because the land and everything else is more expensive. But also there's an advantage because you're not paying, infrastructure costs or having to install septic systems or other things, as long as you're doing it in those areas that are already connected to infrastructure. And so I think we're definitely open to, that being part of the matrix, but I don't know that we're going to get to that level of detail because we honestly think it's something for the governing board to decide what they want those priorities to be.
And I'll just quickly add that some of the peer housing trust funds gave us insight that for the most part, they're able to fund what the market provides. So sometimes it is ultimately the number of developers that come forward and, are applying for these loans don't really necessitate, what's the word I'm trying to say? Don't really have the options of, saying I can build it here or I can build it here. They've usually already selected their site, and it's whether or not the board has the funds to fund them or to fund nothing. So
yeah, I mean, I think, you can be in, I think that part of what we're doing here is like suggesting that there is a pipeline building process at the beginning of this where you're actually, one of the reasons we want that 501c3 with local staff is to really convene partners like developers and jurisdictions and funders to say, hey, these are our priorities, right? We want to see these kinds of projects come through. Who's working on that? Who's got something that I can already feed into the system? Because if you're able to communicate your priorities clearly to the development community, then, and you have a compelling enough sort of, set of financial products that they can use, then they will be able to start coming up with projects that meet your criteria, right? So I don't think it's quite as like kind of black and white as saying, oh, we'll just do whatever folks, want to build. But I think it's a little bit, it is important to make sure that we create this with enough flexibility to allow for market-based development to happen, because ultimately this isn't going to be compelling enough. It's not like we're just saying, here's a bunch of cash, like just take it and build things, right? So it's not going to be quite compelling enough to totally pivot the market from what it already wants to do, right? So it's kind of trying to strike that balance between where the market is at, what financing we can actually provide with this, and how we bring those together to create great kinds of projects that meet the criteria and priorities of the fund.
No, I understand. I think that's going to be the struggle for us, is trying to figure out that governance model, because, at the risk of sounding parochial, when really I try to be regional minded, the last thing that I think we want to do up here is to put money into a regional trust fund that then, because of price points, right? You said most of the time development goes where the price is. And I think if you look at the median incomes that you showed a minute ago required to afford housing, it shows that in Jasper County, you can build and live in a house for a whole lot cheaper than what you can in Beaufort County. So, from a price standpoint, Beaufort County is going to have a really hard time competing. The urban areas, the urban centers where we're really struggling for workforce, is going to have a really hard time meeting that cost differential. So, I don't want to put public tax dollars in that's then going to exacerbate and build a lot of housing down in Hardyville, which again, from a transportation standpoint and workforce living in my centers. At the same time, I don't think we want to be so strict that we don't spread the wealth sort of fairly around the region. So I just think we got to figure that out a little bit before I think some of us are going to be willing to jump in.
Okay. And I think we can, work on that a little bit more. Ultimately, I think that, also that I know that, folks who are on the sort of participating jurisdictions, I know like Eric Greenway from Beaufort County, I think has promised to kind of have some more meetings and help kind of move some of this forward. We can make a certain number of recommendations, but I hear you, right? Like ultimately it's about like, how does that really happen and how does it get set up? And so I think that's partially, what I want to say is this is something that every like regional entity I know struggles with, right? So it's not like a unique problem. It's not a problem that I'm surprised or sort of a challenge that I am surprised about. I completely hear you and agree. And I think what I can say is that I have a lot of faith that it can get solved and figured out, but that it's going to take, the other thing to just know is that, deals take time and it depends on pipeline. And so a lot of what we want to do also is start figuring out from each jurisdiction, what is the pipeline of deals that could potentially exist here, and how do we sort of set up for success throughout the region, and especially in some of our urban centers, whether that's because we have, a certain piece of land we've been looking to get developed, or whether that's because we have, a developer who's been very interested in working with us and where, we just need to kind of figure out the right financing to get that over the hump, or whether it's because we have zoning challenges, which is another thing we hear a lot about, to be frank, in some of the jurisdictions that are more urban, that are making it harder for developers to develop. And are there ways in which we can kind of work through those challenges to make it easier for folks to kind of build that pipeline locally? So I think there's a lot of different pieces to this that need to come into play as we think about kind of where that development can happen. But ultimately, like this, it just has to be something, like if the deals can happen, right, then I think this fund can fund them. So that's really the challenge, is just making sure that there are fewer barriers to those deals, and that if cost is the challenge, then hopefully this fund can help overcome that, rather than be something that just, as you've said, sort of flows to the cheapest possible places, because I don't think that's what anybody really wants to see.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions from the board? Hearing none, Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Very good presentation, and look forward to getting the information from you. Talk to you later.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
The next item on our agenda is Katie Herrera from the Beaufort County Storm Utility Management presentation.
Morning. There is a clicker up here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it'll work or not. We'll
Okay.
Can those of you online see this?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, I can see it also.
All right, great.
That's huge on his phone.
Okay, the clicker does not work.
Okay, just let me know.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again for inviting me out to speak to you all today about where the county is and our SoLoco implementation team is in implementing the new stormwater design standards for our region. I know that some of you are very intimately familiar with this process and this project. I know Van served on our technical subcommittee as well with me. So, and some of you aren't quite as familiar. So I want to just provide a brief background on how we kind of started with this, where we are at currently, and then where we, foresee ourselves being in the next 6 months. So, next slide, Rob. Initially, this project began in late 2017, early 2018, and what the county realized, it was sort of by our own volition, was that we're seeing a lot of development pressure come in, not only within Beaufort County, but also other jurisdictions and other counties. What we know is that water, unlike people, does not understand the jurisdictional boundaries, and what we do in the county isn't necessarily reflected in other areas, for example, Jasper County. And we see a lot of that runoff coming into our different jurisdictions. So the goal here was to have everyone in the participating municipalities have the same standards so that you weren't seeing political jurisdiction shopping just to get a plan put together or a development in place. So those municipalities included ourselves, the town of Port Royal, city of Beaufort, city of Hardyville staff, town of Bluffton, and Jasper County staff. From getting the SoLoco group together, we created a technical subcommittee. Again, that was with participants from all of the participating jurisdictions. And we put out an RFQ to get this manual kind of off the ground and running. We were able to bring on the Center for Watershed Protection as well as McCormick Taylor to sit with us and design this manual and trying to incorporate different approaches to stormwater runoff, not only from a volume control aspect, but also from a water quality control aspect. So again, our technical subcommittee was with all of the participating jurisdictions, and we met over the course of, a year and a half, and to be honest, we're actually still meeting about these new design standards. Just to give, again, a brief background, so we began meeting in 2019, and after we got the draft manual and ordinance set up, we wanted to provide public input and comment into what was going to be presented and coming down the line. So we held several public meetings. We had one both north and south of the Broad, and we had public comments close mid-February 2020. And the technical subcommittee got back together, reviewed all that information, and then from there we had the final document prepared and sent to each jurisdiction at the end of March 2020. Conveniently, this coincided with really the issues we've all had with COVID. So from there, it took a little bit of time for us, next slide, to individually as jurisdictions figure out what was going to work and what wouldn't from what the manual stated.
So again, we've got a little bit of a gap in time from March to August. From the Beaufort County perspective, we were told very early on that the standards we have already implemented and in place were not to backslide in any way. And we wanted to make sure that we carried that through the whole new manual. So again, after we've done a couple of presentations for both the town of Port Royal as well as the city of Beaufort on these new standards, with final approval coming from Beaufort County Council at the end of December in 2020. Next slide. In early 2021, we did hold staff training, we held staff training as well as Beaufort County developer training to get them more familiar with the standards that were coming down the line. Certainly this was no surprise. Again, public comment at that point had been almost a year prior. So we've involved everybody again as early as we can. One thing we also wanted to make sure of is, as we have these developers coming in with these new standards, we also wanted to ensure that Beaufort County staff, not only stormwater staff, but community development staff as well, who are involved in our plan review process, understood how our ordinances would work together and the kinds of changes we would be seeing on some of these plans coming down the line. So again, Beaufort County implemented this manual February 1st of this year. To date, we've seen a total of 5 submissions under these new standards. We did provide exceptions to adopting the manual if the project had already come for approval prior to that February 1st, 2021 implementation. We do have projects that are submitted for conceptual review, and we felt it was not appropriate to have them come that deadline redesign the whole site. So we wanted to give them that grace. And we've also have some existing PUDs that have adopted specific water quality and water quantity control parameters within their PUDs. So we've allowed them to work under those PUDs. Again, though, the PUD documents do have to include their requirements for water quality and water quantity. Beaufort County being almost 50% water, our stormwater standards are very stringent, but it's all to protect our natural resources. And our requirements come straight from the EPA and the Clean Water Act. All of our waterways need to be fishable, drinkable, and swimmable. And because Beaufort County has so many shellfish harvesting areas, our rules are even more stringent. So this manual just really helps us ensure that development's coming in and it's coming in appropriately, and managing and controlling runoff in the same way. Next slide. So a lot of the manual that they created was, or I guess we all created, took a lot of what was already within the Beaufort County Stormwater Design Manual. For example, we still require the threshold of disturbance for 5,000 square feet or more to have a Beaufort County stormwater permit. Initially, the manual for peak discharge stormwater control only included the 2, 10, and 25-year storm events. Beaufort County already adopted the 50 and 100-year storm events as well, so that was something we ensured stayed consistent between the manuals. Beaufort County still does require on-lot single-family homes to control the volume of runoff they're creating if they're not currently within a master plan community that takes all of that runoff into account. We still have requirements for how wide our easements are to ensure that all of the BMPs, the best management practices that these communities are designing and putting in, can be maintained properly. You can build it, but if you don't maintain it, you're not sticking to what the permit requires you to do. Our permit application format is still the same. Certainly between the different jurisdictions, there'll be some differences, but for our developers, it was an easy transition. for them. And then conceptual plan and our final plan checklists are also very similar. I'll provide kind of an example of that in a minute. What some of the biggest differences are with this manual are post-construction water quality requirements. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, it's on the same right slide. Beaufort County, because bacteria is our biggest pollutant of concern, bacteria is again required to be removed from these designed communities. We also have nitrogen removal rates, but the new manual adopts total suspended solid removal rates. Previous to that, it was just phosphorus. And TSS gives us a better grasp on, controlling TSS gives us a better grasp on not only phosphorus removal, but also any sort of microns that are above like 2 milligrams. There's a lot that we can control with having TSS be removed instead of just strictly phosphorus. The Beaufort County Stormwater Manual used to include design standards for the SCDOT as well as the DHEC BMP manuals. What we've done is removed that information, and just by reference, they have to be meeting all of the state's requirements. So, it allows them to know exactly what they need to put in via the state standards. We're not going to be any less stringent than the state on those items. Next slide. Perfect. So this is just an example of what our checklist used to look like prior to the implementation of the Southern Lowcountry Design Manual. We had 2 separate checklists that were provided to developers. Whereas now we have a full comprehensive list. So everything that you're going to need to provide throughout the planning and design and build process is all provided at the same time. Our concept plan includes application and the NOI information for the state of South Carolina. The vicinity map, where you're actually putting this project. Are you located within a water body that has a 303D list classification, a TMDL classification? We also require people to provide their site plan checklists, all their FEMA information, wetland information, and then their BMP maintenance plan. Again, we can ask you to build these BMPs, but if you're not maintaining them, you lose the function relatively quickly. Final plans also include having the applicants pay for their permits, the USGS topographical map, any soils information, again, those impaired water body classifications, and then all of the built out as-built and their stormwater pollution prevention plans. Next slide. Perfect. So again, just an example of what the checklist looks like now. I think we've made it easier for the development community. Again, they're going to know exactly what they need to provide during each phase of design. One of the other things that the goals of this manual was also to create different ways of thinking as far as how we manage stormwater runoff from a quality and quantity perspective. For example, Beaufort County has over 1,000 stormwater ponds in its jurisdiction. There's a lot. And a lot of times when building these ponds, you're changing the terrain, you're potentially even deforesting big plots of land just to make room for a water quality device that, again, those trees and those forests provide potentially just as much uptake. So we really wanted to see how we could develop using ideas for green infrastructure and low impact design, and how those practices can be integrated, in further advancing what we know now versus what we knew 30 years ago. So I think we've done a great job with our new standards. The other thing that we are integrating fully in January of 2022 is going to be our better site design plans. Right now, those are left optional. as we have conversations with community development, we want to make sure that the stormwater department isn't going to be conflicting with the community development side of things, planning and zoning. So we're having actually conversations now about how do we integrate that appropriately. And so what you see over here on the left side of the screen is what the site planning process looks like. You know, a lot of the land that's currently available in our municipality, and again, I'm speaking specifically for Beaufort County, are lower lying areas. They tend to be very wet. And are these big projects coming in really the best way to appropriately grow and develop in our area? So that's, you know, again, one thing we're asking people to do is take into consideration how much fill are you going to have to bring in and what does that do to your property. You know, it typically involves a lot of tree removal, whereas we're trying to make sure that some of those things are preserved. Next slide. So what we did in this study was really break down what standards we were going to have between all the jurisdictions. There are 3 different groups. We have our Savannah River Watershed, which is what you see in orange there. That portion of Jasper County tends to be very rural. So not having shellfish standards apply in that watershed made a little more sense. Again, there's no classified shellfish harvesting areas there, so design standards are a little bit modified for that region. In the pink region, which does include a small portion of rural and northern Beaufort County, again, similar standards. There aren't any shellfish harvesting beds, and so the design standards don't necessarily need to be as stringent. We're still requiring site design for the 85% storm event, and then 2, 10, and 25-year volume control events as well. And then certainly what you see is the largest portion, green, is the shellfish standards for each of these groups. The hash lines represent all the waters classified for shellfish harvesting. And as you can see, again, almost all of our jurisdictions are contained, especially within northern Beaufort County, the city and the town. We're all underneath these shellfish standards. So the standards that we have to implement on site here are retaining the 95th percentile storm event, which is about 1.95 inches within 24 hours. Again, mentioning the standards for removal rates for TSS, total nitrogen, and bacteria. Peak control, we've adopted, again, Beaufort County having the 50 and 100-year storm event included in that as well for all of our developments. And then the 100-year 24 storm event being controlled using the 10% rule analysis, which I'll touch base on in a second. Again, we already have standards for our natural resources surveys included in the community development code. So again, just making sure that what we're implementing with our stormwater designs jives with what community development, planning and zoning. And then last but not least, documenting the use of better site design. Slide. So that's what Beaufort County has adopted for all of their standards. We've also adopted a change for the design calculation methodology. Previously, we quantified our runoff and our water quality treatment based on the amount of effective impervious area, which was Appendix E of our manual. In just a second, I'll show you what that looks like. Again, we're using phosphorus, nitrogen, and bacteria. Now moving to the TSS, nitrogen and bacteria. And then we had sort of limited options for what we wanted to see on site for stormwater best management practices. Next slide. So on the left is the BMP manual and what sort of BMPs were required on site. what the parameters were as far as an effective impervious cover, and then what we're transitioning to here. This is the matrix that shows we've included, I think, 14 different types of BMPs that can be used on site. One of the additions to this is the tree planting and preservation method. We already have open space requirements, but what the new manual does is actually gives you credit for keeping as many trees on site. Again, each tree has its own uptake, and therefore, you know, it can be an effective BMP for stormwater control. Next slide. The other matrix, the table on your right there, just shows the best types of BMPs to use in consideration of what your site kind of looks like. For example, bringing it down between rural use and urban use, and then how much it's going to cost to maintain and what the construction costs are. The goals of this new manual were in no way to hinder development in the county. We're really here to help. And what we realize is to get ahead of the curve and continue to preserve our area, these are the standards that need to be implemented to do that. So I think we've done a great job in providing the development community various methods to get the quality and quantity controls taken care of. Next slide. So this was just an example of the old way that we used to do it. It was very simplistic. How much open space do you have? How much of your property will be pervious? And then how much of your property will be impervious? Not really taking into consideration what the soils look like in those areas. Do you have open space in 15 different places, or do you have one large open space area? And then next slide. And now what we've done is broken it down. I know you've got all the different types of covers for your property, as well as your soils type listed, and then how to get those removal requirements using the different types of BMPs. One thing that has changed from the BMP manual to the SOLOCO standard is, again, the type of quantity control you can get with a stormwater pond. Stormwater ponds are incredibly efficient at removing all of those pollutants of concern I've been discussing, but for volume control, because of our seasonal high groundwater table, they may not be the best for actually retaining runoff, especially in larger storm events. So what we've done in this manual is removed all the runoff reduction a pond will have, and you've got to meet runoff reductions using different types of BMPs, not just dig a hole and forget about it. Drain everything to that. Can we infiltrate? You know, there are still portions of the county that have great soils. Can we get some groundwater recharge? Or you can use a pond but integrate irrigation reuse, so that none of it ends up going off-site. And then the next two slides really are just, again, a more zoomed in view of what we have. Up at the top, the developer selects which watershed protection area they're in. For us, it's always going to be the bacteria and shellfish watershed protection areas. And then, you know, putting in all of your calculations, you know what you have to control as far as your runoff, which is down at the bottom, and then will implementing those BMPs actually meet the standards that the county has in place. So next slide. So it just tells you right here, overall how much volume you've controlled, have you met the minimums for your pollutant removals, and then, you know, same thing for the different jurisdictions. So I think we've done a really great job. Again, we're not trying to hinder development in any way, but how can we be more forward thinking about what we're doing on site? And then next slide. Last but not least, we also require the 10% rule analysis. What this does ensures that your project in no way, shape, or form is going to impact any downstream development. You do have to control all of your pre-construction and post-construction volume has to be, I'm sorry, let me explain that a better way. Your post-construction runoff has to be smaller than your pre-construction runoff. So as long as you're meeting that requirement and you're not impacting any downstream points, up to the point where the drainage area is 100 acres, you're meeting standards for the county. So, next slide. Also, with the update of the BMP manual, the state has also updated their construction general permit plan. One of those adoptions, we always have required the state NOI for DHEC to be provided. At this point, DHEC has said any construction going in that's under an acre, the municipalities can handle on their own. So that is one document that we no longer require. We're still waiting on the NPDES general permit to be updated for the municipalities, with the census data coming out from 2020 and then them updating their MS4 list. We are anticipating some changes that may need to come out of that. And then again, just reiterating, we still require all the same controls for single family projects as well coming into the county. Next slide. So again, we're still having these conversations with the technical subcommittee. We're all at different places as far as implementation is concerned. Beaufort County is currently the only municipality that's adopted this plan. Again, mentioning before, better site design practices are optional at this point to ensure that community development standards and our standards align. Rob and I actually just met yesterday on having those conversations and continuing that. So if there are changes to be made prior to January 1, 2022, we're ahead of the ballgame on that. Again, we coordinate closely with all of the staff here as well as the technical subcommittee. And at this time, we are anticipating only minor updates for the January 1st, 2021 deadline. DHEC is reviewing these documents now, and we so far have not heard much feedback from them, which is a good thing. And then other jurisdictions are planning on adopting within, I think, that time frame as well. So with that, questions?
I just had one. Town of Bluffton hasn't adopted.
Not yet.
Okay.
They went to first reading, I believe, at town council, and they had some public comment that their council felt needed to be readdressed. So that was part of our May 13th meeting, is seeing the list of comments they received, and then if there was anything that any of the other jurisdictions needed to weigh in on at that point. I think they received over 70 comments, and from that there may only be 2 changes, but they're very minimal. Mm-hmm.
Katie, thank you for a really great presentation and all the work on this. You referenced several times that it's called the Southern Lowcountry Design Standards. Does that mean it only applies to Southern Lowcountry?
Yes. I mean, our jurisdictions or all?
Well, generally Southern Lowcountry sort of been defined by Bluffton, Hilton Heads, Hardyville, Ridgeland.
Oh, okay.
Northern Beaufort County Northern Regional Implementation Committee.
Sure.
And so again, I saw that it was referenced in your presentation. You referenced a few times that it was Southern Lowcountry Design Standards.
Yes, that was the goal. Initially, everybody was on board with this, and then through different municipality decisions, it became something that wasn't participated in with all the SoLoco folks.
Okay. I think it's prudent to require the BMP maintenance plan as a part of that, so high five for making that a part of the thing. Mm-hmm. And I imagine the post-construction runoffs are based on those BMPs running at sort of full efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So the plan's prudent, but is there inspections after the fact of BMPs and some type of compliance that's required?
Yes, so Beaufort County will do a final inspection on the BMP after construction's over, just to make sure it's online, it's ready to go, functioning as designed. And then from there, we require that builders provide annual updates on their BMPs, and then Beaufort County has the option at least once per 5 years to go in and inspect.
Okay. Thank you.
So the recording, what's required from the standpoint of the developer reporting back on an annual basis, is that continues for how long?
In perpetuity.
Always.
Yep. We record a stormwater maintenance agreement, and regardless of who owns the property in 20 years, that agreement will always be in place.
It's attached to the deed or
It
attached?
is. Yep.
Any other questions from the board? Seeing none, thank you very much, Katie. Appreciate it.
It's Katie.
Next item on our agenda is Stephanie Rossi with Military Resilience Project Update.
All right, thank you for your time today. It's been a couple months since we reported the status of the Military Installation Resilience Review Project. So I wanted to give you an update today, and I'm going to turn it over to our consultant team from Sherwood Design Engineers. I have Haitham Shada here, and I think you need to share his screen if that's possible, and I'll just turn it over to him right now.
Hello, everyone. My name's Haitham Shada. I work with Sherwood Design Engineers. I've been with the firm over 3 years now and worked on projects throughout the East Coast and internationally as well. But I know you've got an update last time, but I'm hoping to give you an idea a little bit of how we've started evaluating the structure and some of the high points that we're noticing as we've continuously had conversations. So if you can see my screen, I'll walk you through a couple of slides. I'll keep it quick though. We good with the screen?
Yes, you're good.
So, basically, one of the reasons that we're on board and the team that we brought together is on board is to look at the layers of previous studies, look at the physical inputs of what was been presented in the past, and start evaluating the net around military bases and surrounding communities and the impacts and influences involved. There have been really great studies, really great policies, and one thing that we're trying to bring on board is some additional layers of analysis and additional thought from experts throughout the field to give you a more holistic approach. We're not going to dig into this too much, but we've started evaluating and breaking it up into 3 buckets. We're really in the first bucket right now. Task 1 is really to identify and discuss with community members, with groups like you, on some of the data, threats, and needs of the communities. I'm really trying to understand the priorities, understand the frequency of issues, and understand the adaptive capacity of the community. Based off of this work, we really want to understand how extreme weather and sea level rise layer into your community development. Understanding the shorelines of today and understanding the shorelines of the future and the impacts in between are a way for us to plan for a more resilient future and a more resilient community centered around the military and centered around the values that the community enjoys today. We brought in Biohabitats, a nationally recognized group, one of the best groups that we've worked with, to really start evaluating some of the ecosystem services and shoreline services that currently occur in the area. Based off the previous conversation, it really appears that water quality and the shellfish population is extremely important. And so one thing we're trying to bring in is how does the shoreline adjust and change to future adapts? I'll walk you through a couple of slides. These are kind of meant to stack on top of each other, but as residents in the area, I'm sure you've noticed how tidal events are where sensitivities begin. And understanding what tidal events do today, the impacts of shoreline, and the benefits of saltwater marshland and its transition to unconsolidated shoreline, its relationship to erosion and relationship to resiliency for people and infrastructure. As you see, today, tides are slowly creeping up, slowly inundating your marshlands, and you start finding that the extreme high water of today is the intermediate tides of tomorrow. And as your shorelines adjust and your elevations are having to adapt, what ecosystem services, what physical services, and what infrastructure services can we adapt and maybe implement that help restore a natural shoreline as your shoreline is slowly is inundated by future climate change? And so what we're trying to bring is a toolkit that understands the future of we like to kind of the bottom of the bathtub of sea level, its relationship to extreme weather events, but it's also a relationship to the infrastructure and responsiveness of your communities. Understanding how your community responds to a hurricane or an extreme weather event or a hazard is important. But what we really wanted to think about is how this community resilience plan can live in different times. How can it really understand and prepare for future action? How can it recover from extreme hazards or extreme events? And how can they respond during events to provide the peace of mind and the community quality of life to live on a coastal condition? And so we brought in a couple of precedents that have started feeling a little closer to home in this community and this environment. And so this is really the crux of what we wanted to start showing you, the different toolkits of what we would be presenting, approaching, and looking at with a resilience plan. This precedent right here really represents an adapted measure that understands the value of coves, understands the value of a natural shoreline, and finds ways of integrating larger ecosystem projects with harder protectionary measures. This project had a key component that we thought was adaptable to your geography and ecology, and it related to an oyster revetment shoreline. And not only does the oyster revetment shoreline provide day-to-day services, having that economically and ecologically is important, but the accretion process, the buildup of what creates a shoreline is something that's important with the oyster beds. Depending on the habitat and depending on the environmental conditions, we find that sometimes they may be able to keep up with sea level rise in certain situations. And so how can this overall process of integrating and seeding natural resources create a living and resilient edge that provides opportunities for a more adaptable future and a more natural future? And so building off of that and some of the more developed edges, we've noticed that there is a displacement effect that's occurring as development occurs and as sea level rises. And the interactions between stormwater, sea level is an issue today. Low-lying areas are valuable. They provide areas for water to passively slow, filter, and enter the ocean. And so how do we think about that as an opportunity to layer in coastal strategies and deal with runoff issues today and the future? This edge really provided an opportunity for the community to provide a multifunctional and a multi-layered approach that allowed them to chase down some federal dollars and federal financing that helped make this a more realistic possibility. And not only is it a physical response, we found that some of the most integrated options really provide the community the knowledge they need to feel prepared. One thing we noticed with our work in Horry County was the community's uncertainty, their inability to truly know what their risk is and where their risk lies, and when will their risk change, and where to go when an event or a hazard is happening. And so how can we prepare for imminent threats, respond to past threats, and recover not just physically, but also emotionally from a storm event and understand the risk and the threats involved with the past event? And so by mitigating some of this vulnerability and providing the community the ability to plan further, we really, like I've been trying to illustrate in some of these slides, trying to provide different parts and pieces, because what we found is resilience is a word that represents a community's ability to live and function where they live, where they want to. And it's about providing natural, physical, and infrastructure resources that are available to all. And with a community like yours that's centered around military and the presence of the military, you really have an ability to have an adaptive infrastructure that can respond quickly and continue providing the resources you need. And so basically, like I said earlier, we're in task 1. We're talking to you again, but all the team has now got contracts. We're all really starting to dig into things. But what's clear and important and why we jumped into this meeting is to really help define some of the structure to you as we're bringing in data. We're trying to clear through some clutter, trying to organize and adapt ourselves to what is known in this community, what is your priorities in this community, the frequency of issues, the frequency of growth, and the frequency of adaptive capacity. So we can really map your known conditions, understand the gaps that our expertise can bring, and really identify and classify criticality in physical and non-physical ways, and define the interdependence between your community and the infrastructure that connects you. And as we do this, an important part about this is organizational structure, not only for the project, but for the communities. Identifying gaps, identifying knowledge, and identifying ways to better connect your communities and understand how resilience can live in a larger net of approach. And so I'll pause there. I just wanted to give you an update that we are on board. We will be visiting soon, and wanted to give you the ability and opportunity to talk about our structure, our approach, and any comments or concerns you may have.
Questions from the board? Anybody online have a question? Thank you, appreciate it. I saw some slides there that gave me some concern. If you wouldn't mind sending a copy of your presentation to us, I would greatly appreciate it. I'd like to look at it a little closer.
Will do.
With no further questions, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Stephanie. Move on to our prioritized list of action items. With that, I'm going to go to the Excel spreadsheet that I sent out to everybody that has the information to review on those. Hopefully we can go through these pretty quickly. So let's go to item number 1, the mandate for NRPIC. Do we have any update on that with anything happening?
No, we don't.
Okay.
I sent the Northern Regional Plan document out to council a few months ago.
Yes.
And then we're going to circle back at some point, discuss it as a council and work session, and then be prepared. So I'd say maybe a few months, maybe after the summer sometime.
Yes, I think that'd be good. And of course, we're still working on our comp plans too, so that kind of ties together. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, would greatly appreciate. I'm going to keep it on here, and we'll keep coming back to it to make sure everybody's continuing to take a look at it. Ladies Island Plan Implementation Committee, we've already gone through that with the dissolution document. Number 3, local option sales tax. We're going to have a Yemassee update, but I don't know that we have anybody from Yemassee here, so we'll put it on for next month.
But, you know, it'll be on the ballot for Beaufort County.
Yeah, so
yes.
I want to thank the county council for putting it on the ballot. I know the jurisdictions are talking about an educational effort, so that's sort of rolling.
Good.
Okay, great, thank you. The uniform yard waste policy update, anything on that?
Not that I'm aware of.
We were scheduled to actually have the solid waste presentations, but I don't think we had any. We could get to it the other night.
That's right, yeah, okay. Number 5, ID future areas of unincorporated areas for pickup. Any update on the ID process?
I don't think there's been any progress on that, but we keep bringing it up, so I don't know when your contracts get renewed.
Ours is up, and so we've just completed an RFP process. I believe staff is in the next month or so going to make a recommendation. for vendor.
We're about a year out.
Well, maybe there's possibilities still to do that, identify some areas. Well, we've closed north of Broad, we've closed one drop-off point, but might push us more toward that in some more densely populated areas, but I don't have anything positive to report on that this time.
I know the IDs are working and the refuse centers have been reorganized.
Yeah, I mean, that's working, absolutely, but I'm talking about curbside pickup. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How long is the contract for the city of Beaufort?
Historically, we've done them, I think, for 5 years.
Is yours 5 years too?
Yeah. Particularly if they have to make an investment in roll carts and that sort of thing, they'd like to extend it out because they're trying to recover some of that cost. But
So I guess the possibility of a combined effort is going to be put off again for another 5 years if we accept any of the RFPs.
Except on Ladies Island?
We pick up our residential.
Residential.
Residential on Ladies Island, yeah, so distant.
So residential is potential there, and Fort Royal would be the Shell Point areas.
I mean, if they're in the urban areas and they're contiguous, they just have to annex in and they can get curbside pickup.
I don't think that'll happen. It's a chicken and egg in some areas. Be honest with you.
So contiguous and within the growth boundaries.
So are we saying that item might want to just come off of the?
I think I can talk to our solid waste. I think the idea was they wouldn't have to be annexed to get the service when it was put on the list. But,
I know when it was being discussed as an impact fee, and it was going to be kind of uniform across, all properties regardless of jurisdictional boundaries. That's when we were reconsidering the status for a contract, because if I was, my residents were going to pay a garbage fee and then pay this impact fee, I couldn't justify that. I would cancel my contract and let the county deal with curbside for everybody. But I think we've revisited that through a separate enterprise fund, and I know that y'all are doing trying to figure all that out. I think there's some economy of scale if we do go that route with the city and the town. That's what we traditionally have done. But we went a little differently because of the way we handle yard waste. So.
Because you pick up your own yard waste, right?
Yeah, we love picking up yard waste.
The clam bucket. Yeah. It's really efficient, right?
No comment.
Well, but to their point with the yard waste, as long as the city of Beaufort puts yard waste in plastic, it's not good either.
Well, that's a frustration of mine for what it's worth.
It's mine too, and I live in the city.
Yeah, so we
can't compost it.
So I was recently told that that's a requirement by ordinance, not by our vendor contract. So I've asked staff to look into changing that ordinance, because I have a couple of empty cans and I don't have a very big yard. I can barely put my yard debris in the plastic cans, and then I got a slap on the wrist that I needed to put them in plastic bags right after we had just banned single-use plastic bags in grocery stores. And it seemed a little nonsensical to me that we would ban plastic grocery bags but require people to put yard debris in plastic bags. So we're working on that.
So maybe an update, if you want to leave it on the list, maybe we need an update from the county solid waste too, might be a suggestion for another meeting. And we can talk about composting yard waste, because that's one of their ideas, is to do that more.
Yeah, and it's on the kind of side, with the closing the convenience stores, we are seeing an uptick of dumping and people unauthorized use of dumpsters, if you will. I passed a few of them on the way today, and it's becoming a problem.
Yeah.
We'll leave it on the list. Hopefully.
Maybe we can ask Rob to see if solid waste could do a brief for us.
Yeah. And I understand there's some conversation going about a complex, a solid waste recycling complex. I haven't been briefed on it yet, but
there's a lot of ideas out there that we could hear them talk about. Yes.
For sure.
For sure.
Do you want me to invite them to the next meeting?
That's up to the chairman, but it might be.
I think it'd be a good idea. It sounds like
we got the stormwater today,
There's a lot of separation between the municipalities and the county on what we're doing, how we're doing. It seems like, the original goal was that we could combine services, get some more efficient and effective use out of it. But
My understanding, and Dan would know better, so tell me if I'm not speaking the truth. But we had looked at a combined contract with the waste hauler 10 years ago or something like that. And after all the analysis was done, it really didn't make a difference if we had our individual contracts or we had a joint contract with them. I mean, the capital investment for them was the same, the pickup schedule was the same, and then the issue of the yard debris.
That's what created somewhat of the separation, because we have an agreement to work together if it makes sense on different items. But because we do, like I mentioned, the yard waste separately, it just kind of put us in a different realm, if you will.
Would you mind following up with, checking in with Bill just to see if there's any opportunity and the timeline of?
But Mike, you're right. I think there's been talk of a, whatever you want to call it, center of some kind by county staff somewhere to consolidate efforts to.
Okay, it'll stay on the list.
I think that would, yes, sir.
And if we can get a presentation possibly next meeting, we won't load up too many presentations so it takes us out, but that would probably be a good one to do. We've already heard regional stormwater. Did anybody have any further comments on stormwater?
Great presentation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Just educating. We'll check in with staff on where we are in the process. I know there was some reference to county standards by ordinance in our current.
But I don't think we address MS4 as much either.
Right.
So we just have to figure out where we are.
So we may have adopted by reference. We'll double check and see where we are, get it moving.
And if y'all would like, I know we were planning on doing, I know there was a late runoff, but election, but if you would like.
Yeah, that was me, thank you.
If you would like another presentation, we'd be happy to provide.
Thank you.
And I think you'll be hearing from the Resiliency Project.
Yes. We're working on that as well with internally.
Yeah, but for the military one.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that gives me concern looking at the resiliency with the military one there. Item number 7, pathways. Noah, you were going to give us an update.
Yeah, just really brief update. We have gone through a second round of comments from task force members and staff at the various jurisdictions. I think the document is at a point now where we'd like some people to see it. So we are setting up presentations throughout the months of June and July and hopefully August with the city, I think, because y'all are off in July.
We're taking a little break.
Yeah, that's nice. So
really for our staff.
We're all still here.
Yeah, we're all still here. I know where to find you guys. So, we'll be presenting to LAT's technical committee next Friday. Port Royal will be June 9th. Town of Hilton Head Public Planning Committee will be June 24th. And then the dates after that get a little bit tentative. There's a SOLOCO meeting June 29th that I think we'd like to get the presentation on the agenda there. And then we'll have the Hilton Head Town Councils in July. And so the ultimate goal here would be to try and get municipalities on board with adopting this by resolution. And there's a lot of benefits to be had by doing this jointly rather than the county having their own bike ped plan and the municipalities kind of saying, we have all these other little projects we want to do. This way, the municipalities can make their own choices with the pathway projects that they'd like to see. And then on the fringes between unincorporated and incorporated areas, there's that coordination. I think it's critical that happens so that if folks do have a connected network and there's not a disconnect there between trying to get to places they want to go, jobs, stores, that kind of thing. So
even we can't get you into council until August, would you be able to send out the report for feedback in advance?
Yeah, absolutely.
Council, and we'll get it out to our folks.
Yeah, if this board would like, I can send the document out, or someone at the county can disperse it. It's ready to go. So
Yeah, I think we'd appreciate that. Get a look at that.
And Steve and I did meet with, Dean and I met with Bill and Dave Bridgard. Cool. And so they're aware of it, and I believe David has a hard copy.
Okay.
So yeah, I can get it to you all.
Thank you, no, I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention that we have a traitor in our midst. I don't know if you're all aware, but today is Noah's last day working for Beaufort County.
Real game.
Taking a job with the town of Port Royal.
Yeah.
So
I'm crossing over to the right side.
Rob said I'm gonna have to get used to Anthony being a good thing.
But I think it's great, and it's actually this project, this Spike Ped Plan. I think that he can continue to make these presentations representing another jurisdiction, but it's being a multi-jurisdictional plan. I think that here's an example, of the cooperative effort and how it can
You're going to be the poster child.
Yeah, little do they know it. Scared.
We're used to taking the lead on everything, so that's fine.
It's our loss, but I think it's a town's gain, and we're happy to know the town is in good hands.
We might want you to modify and show the dates of changes that are happening in those plans after the separation. They may have a different weighting. Okay, I think we already talked about convenience centers. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
I think we probably can take it off the list. I don't know. Except you're having issues, but that's kind of
Yeah, and then the county's reached out to us to help,
so that's working.
Take convenience centers off and put illegal dumping on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw some of that the other day on way out on Ladies Island, I tell you. Okay, we'll take that one off. We'll show it as completed. Number 9, the plastic bags, and Alice, you committed that once COVID was over, that would be addressed.
Coastal Conservation League is ready to help us, so we can start. We need to change the ordinances probably a little bit, tweak them, and then education, and they have committed to help us with that too. So I will take that through Natural Resource Committee with their help if the municipalities are committed to, it's I don't want to say crackdown, but it's education.
We've had interface with some of our stores that have backslid a little bit and said, hey, so.
It's time. I think it's time. If everyone agrees to start.
I agree.
I think the ordinance may need a few changes too.
I agree with that too. Yeah, I think it was a good start, but I think we found there's some.
And they've got some examples from other places in the state that they can help us with too. So. All right, I'll talk to our legal about that and the research committee.
Okay.
All right, good.
And the town and the city, I guess, will just coordinate with you for
that's fine.
where that is. Great. Okay, number 10. Consolidated versus regional parks. I think the only thing we had here was there was going to be an update from 2 months ago to your list, and you were going to distribute that. Is that something you want to distribute?
Yes, I apologize.
No problem.
They're very.
They were pretty minor.
I think there were 3 changes.
Yes.
We've noted that.
Correct.
We just need to get it out.
Correct. And any update on number 11 with the lawsuit at all, or is that just going to continue?
Due to advice of legal counsel, we have no comment at this time.
Can we take it off the list then?
Pleading the 5th.
Or not? Should we just take it off the list then?
Isn't it something that we'd like to try and accomplish, or is it completely impossible?
Through the advice of legal counsel. There's a lot we'd like to accomplish.
So we'll leave it on the list for non-verbal updates later on. Number 13.
Go Harvey.
Yeah, exactly.
Growth development. coordination of the master plans. I think that you were looking to do a MPC update.
I think the comp plans are really kind of taking
the comp plans,
taking that responsibility, and so I think the comp plans will probably come here at some point for.
Right, I think that's what we have on the list. Do you want to? Does Nrpic want to precede the MPC in review of those?
It could.
Might be a good thing to do.
They could, run in parallel too. I don't think it makes that big of a difference.
Depends on if there's any modifications that Nrpic wants to make to any of those, I guess.
Right.
The workforce development is something we're just going to hear back again on a periodic basis whenever we think we want to hear them back again for future presentation.
Yeah, because we've got a fair amount of partners in that space. Some progress with the South Coast Cyber Center that's happening right now. The school district got a pretty significant grant. Trying to think who else. There's a healthcare initiative kind of starting up, some conversations there. So other than status reports from time to time, I think.
Right. So let us know when you might want to have a status report update, Stephen. Okay,
You'll see you'll see the Economic Development Corp. We had our strategic planning meeting about a month ago, and you'll see the Corp taking a little greater interest and a little greater activity in the workforce development piece over the coming years.
Okay. I think it's good to just periodically have each of those come like they did before. I think it was very informative with the presentations they did. There's two new items that were asked to be put on here by York Clover. And that is 15 and 16, rural community fire protection and rural community public water and adequate water. York is not here. Is there?
And he sent me a text. He apologized. He didn't have it on his calendar. He missed it. Didn't know it was, anyway, he apologized, so.
Okay.
You want to wait till
Anybody have any comments, or we'll just, leave it on there and it'll come back next month?
I can ask him what he wants specifically.
And we talked about number 10 again with the comprehensive plans. I'll make it a point that sometime in the next week or two, I will try and get with the county and review your comprehensive plan, same with the city, and see where those are.
Well, we're going to have, you want to give us an update, Rob? Yeah. We're going to have some.
Oh, okay.
What happened here?
It's been a cap.
You're barely done.
I'll let Rob speak for himself.
Just some screen sharing. Oh, wait.
But y'all are on track, right? Yeah.
You can go into public hearing soon, or?
Hold on one second.
We're almost, we're there. I mean, I've got the draft a couple weeks ago.
I don't know if Jerry can see it. Jerry, can you see this? I'd like this to be on the county channel, but your share.
Yes, Rob. Rob, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see.
Okay, good. Something odd happened that I wasn't used to. I just wanted to make people aware kind of where we were in the comprehensive plan, but we do have some upcoming meetings. At our April Planning Commission meeting, we unveiled the draft of our comprehensive plan to the Planning Commission, and really at that point began a public input process. So we not only unveiled it to them, but we unveiled it to the public, and we have it online on our Envision Beaufort County webpage. We've received quite a number of comments, and so staff has been taking each comment provided by the public, by other county officials, by planning commission members, and we've been putting them into a matrix and documenting them, and we'll be then, eventually, as we, enter our public comment period, we will, have staff recommendations of how we want to move forward with each of the comments. So, we're receiving comments, taking them very seriously. We scheduled a public hearing on the comprehensive plan on Monday, June 7th. This is concurrent with our planning commission meeting. This is going to be at a special location at the Buckwalter Recreation Center. And in addition, in a public hearing setting, it's a great opportunity for the public to provide comments, but it's a very formal setting. So we're going to follow through with 2 additional public workshops, reaching out into more of the rural areas of the county. That way, people attend the public hearing and they have some comments and they would like to have a little more informal one-on-one time with staff or with planning commission members. They could attend one of these workshops. The first one will be Tuesday, June 8th, 5 to 7 p.m. They're going to be an open house format. Once again, we're kind of at the tail end of hopefully of the pandemic, but we want to have, some social distancing so we're not all in one crowded room. But it'll be kind of a walkthrough format, looking at boards, being able to view the plan, address questions to staff. So Tuesday, June 8th will be at the Burton Wells. It's actually at the Senior Center next to the Recreation Center at Burton Wells Park. And then on Thursday, June 10th, from 5 to 7, we'll be at the St. Helena Library, and we'll be set up in the large meeting room and maybe also in the hallway, so that people can kind of walk through and look at the, the boards that summarize the plan and address questions to staff. So we're hoping with that we could really, continue our public input. We're hoping then to take all this comments. We're going to have a workshop with our planning commission where we go through each, kind of get their recommendation of how we want to move forward, direct all the edits to our consultants, and then have a final draft. It's always a risk to say when we want to move forward, but I think that our goal will be to go to the August Planning Commission meeting, with the final draft of the plan. They, of course, then make a recommendation to council, and then it goes to Natural Resources and County Council. But that's kind of a glimpse of where we are in the near future, kind of where we're hoping to get by late summer. And, we'd like to ask any questions. The plan is online at envisionbeaufortcounty.com, and, encourage, if you haven't, looked at the plan, to review it. So.
Thanks, Rob.
All right.
Any questions for Rob? Seeing none, we'll go to number 12, Roundtable Comments. Anybody have anything they'd like to put on the table?
I'd just like to mention, and Rob might want to add something to it. We've spent a lot of time with the Real Estate Association regarding the ordinance, the fill ordinance and the flood overlay. So a lot of discussion and listening. So we'll get back to the group about that. Not so much the fill ordinance, it's more the other. Yes. And surveyors and,
And that's before it goes to committee?
It would, Natural Resource Committee. We're still talking about when the appropriate timing is. The fill ordinance probably will go a separate path than the other at this time. So.
Do you have any?
I want to be inclusive to all stakeholders, right? But there's something that bothers me a bit about us taking a draft ordinance and working specifically with a special interest group before the entire public has had an opportunity to sort of weigh in, and that changes would get made And that ordinance would be shaped differently by a single special interest group in a back room before it makes its way through the public
I don't
process.
think anything.
So my suggestion would be that it goes over.
I think you misunderstood what I said. There's no back room. This is just a listening session.
Okay.
I didn't mean for you to think that this was done in a back room or, they wrote a letter which was read publicly at the natural resource meeting.
But we have a public review process, and in the county's case, it goes to a committee meeting, so all members of the public and stakeholders who'd like to be heard and would like to have an opportunity to put input to the ordinance. And then after it comes out of committee or doesn't come out of committee, depending, right? It generally gets shaped in some way, and then it goes on for public hearing and 3 readings of council before it becomes.
It was a 3-page letter. I don't know if you watched that, quite detailed.
Well, I respect that everybody ought to have a seat at the table and be able to provide input on ordinances before they become law. But I also think that there's a fair process and a transparent process in which the shaping and the input of those things should occur. And
well, I don't think anything has happened that wouldn't be done. And I didn't mean to make it sound like it had. I just, at all. They felt like they had not had enough input, and that's why they wrote the letter, and that's why I asked them to write the letter.
Well, but I guess that's the point of the committee and the public hearing and the multiple reading process, is so that
I'm just saying
through that process they can.
Their concerns in that letter, which I can, send to this group, is primarily not the fill ordinance.
Sure. Oh, I'm not discounting their concerns, right? But I think there are a lot of opinions and a lot of perspectives that need to be considered before the ordinance is.
It's complicated, to say the least, yeah.
So do you anticipate changes to the ordinance from the conversations with the
I'm
realtors
still
before it
working.
comes into committee?
Yeah.
I'm still working with staff, our staff, county staff.
Yeah, and and I'll mention, and obviously this may change as we look at it further, but one of the questions that they're raising is that, we've identified an area that we're calling low-lying and subject to flooding, and we've identified it at 10 feet above mean sea level and the datum and all that. And so one of the objections that the most common one we're hearing is that this is redundant. There's already...
Again, Rob, it's not about the objection so much as the process in which the ordinances are considered.
I know.
And when you formed the fill ordinance committee and the overlay committee, that you had developers and you had private sector members as a part of that process to craft the base ordinance. And the implementation committee has forwarded those ordinances on to the respective jurisdictions. And now I think it's incumbent on the jurisdictions to take the ordinances that your committee, the implementation committee has endorsed, and run that through, again, a transparent public process without giving some special interest group a unique opportunity to shape it before everybody has an opportunity to provide input. I just think there's a fairness about it. Again, not about the specific ordinance issues.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say that as staff...
I don't know, we need to give that letter to everyone on this group.
I'd like to definitely get a copy of it.
I think it was 3 pages.
Yeah, we've read it into the record as part of our meeting because we've tabled both of those ordinances.
My only point was that staff, we recognized a concern that they raised that we think has some merit, and we think that there might be another way to address it. And so if we do that, I guess, the question would be, do you feel, does it come back to this committee?
Do we need to go all the way back?
Yeah.
I mean, do we step back 2 steps with, if we, or go directly to Natural Resource Committee again? That's a good question.
But I think that, staff did take into consideration all the comments they made, and obviously we recognize the position they're coming from, and that we have to weigh that in.
But you formed an independent committee outside of the liaison implementation committee as a multi-jurisdictional task force of staff and private sector members and other stakeholders, Coastal Conservation League, for example.
Yes.
And that's where those ordinances were sort of crafted initially. The implementation committee provided some feedback. The fill ordinance, for example, as it came through the city, it went through a work session process and then a reading process of council. So I guess the assumption is if there are significant changes and you feel like it needs to be recrafted, maybe it goes back to that multi-jurisdictional broad stakeholder group that you had.
That may be a good
before it comes.
Yeah, we'd want to make sure that everyone's on board, who were involved in drafting the ordinance. But I guess what I'm saying is from our standpoint and staff, we wouldn't even be considering this, except that I think that one of the concerns they raised is something that we think has some merit we want to look at further, and so we will do whatever is necessary and fair to get this back to where it needs to be.
Well, because of the dissolution of the Plan Implementation Committee, obviously it'll come back to Nrpic. So I guess once it comes out of your foundational group, it probably would want to come back to Nrpic, maybe before it goes to resource.
Okay. All right. That's my only thing.
And yeah, definitely would like to see the letter. Be great.
Yeah.
You got something to us?
Yeah, I have one. I mean,
No, you're on the board. You got something to council?
I can send it.
Anything else? Any other comments anybody wants to make from the board?
Jerry, you got anything?
I'm good, Van. Thank you.
Yeah, let Joe know. I'll have to get with him sometime to sign this document that we talked about earlier.
Will do.
Thank you. And I'll be happy to drive over and get him to sign it anytime. So with that, I'll ask for a motion on adjournment. Second. All in favor? Aye.
Bye.
Motion passes. June 25.
Hey, Jerry weighs out.
Huh?
Adjournment.
Adjournment? Yeah, I vote on that.
Agree.
Don't provide.